Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is the podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am happy to be with you on this blustery Tuesday. Oh my goodness, it is finally raining in California. Actually, I see it trending on Twitter. We're so excited about the rain. We don't get normal seasons like some of the other parts of the country, and it's very blustery and windy and rainy, and it just makes me want to snuggle up with a good book and a cup of tea and go from there. But I do have to leave the house sometimes. That's the sad part about life. Okay, so on that note, I'm happy to have another author joining me today for this episode. Today I'm speaking with Jean K. Carney about her debut novel. It's called Blackbird Blues. It's historical fiction. And for those of you who are regular listeners to the podcast, you'll know that I do love historical fiction. And I'm sure I've mentioned this, but maybe I haven't, that I was a history major in college with a women's studies minor. So this book was right up my alley. It felt like something that I would have read in one of my college courses. Let me go ahead and give you the description of this book. With the help of 60-year-old black jazz man Lucius, Mary Kay O'Donnell, an 18-year-old Irish-American woman and aspiring jazz singer in Chicago, finds her way toward dealing with an unwanted pregnancy and the dying of Sister Michaeline, her voice coach, jazz mentor, and only guide through the bedlam of her childhood. Mary Kay's neighbor, Judge Engelman, introduced her to the work of James Baldwin, and the nuns exposed her to the burgeoning civil rights movement. But Lucius is the first black person Mary Kay comes to really know. They bond over Sister Michaeline's untimely death. Over time, Lucius helps Mary Kay launch her career as a singer in his jazz band. He also gives her Sister Michaeline's diary from her early cloistered years, saying it was the nun's wish. In reading the diary and in conversations with Lucius and Judge Engelman, Mary Kay discovers disillusioning aspects and secrets of her beloved mentor. This is Mary Kay's coming-of-age story as she weighs her options based on the diary, her faith, and her music, set against the backdrop of illegal abortion and child abandonment in the 1963 world of civil rights and interracial jazz. It is entirely a work of fiction, but in today's political climate, one could imagine something similar becoming real. So that is the description of Jean K. Carney's debut historical fiction novel, Blackbird Blues. You can see why it would appeal to me as a history major with a women's studies minor. You know that I love delving deeper into, just specific eras in history. And not long ago we had Susanna Calkins on the royal we. I had Susanna Calkins on the podcast, and that book was also set in Chicago, but 1920s. Very different setting. So I love seeing different aspects of the same city, but different time frames, different perspectives, etc. And this one is got so much going on because, you've got a young woman who is experiencing, she grows up Catholic. She went to Catholic school. She finds herself pregnant and has to figure out what she's doing with that. And is she getting married? Is she going to have an abortion, which is illegal at this time? What does that look like? She had planned to go into the convent, and then she finds out this news. Then her mentor dies. You've got the civil rights movement. You have Mary Kay's relationship with Lucius, and learning to navigate this world that Jean talks about how jazz was interracial, was fairly integrated since the 20s, but that was not the case for larger society. So just a really interesting look at not only Mary Kay's growth and her her journey through this difficult time of her life, trying to figure things out. I mean, 18 is hard enough without all of the other things that Mary Kay has to deal with. And she's helped by Sister Michaeline, maybe not in the ways that she thought she would be, as she reads through her diary and learns more about this woman that she really did see as a mentor and put up on a pedestal to a certain extent. She develops a relationship with Lucius and his son Benny, and he's not mentioned in the blurb, but Jean will talk about Benny a little bit in the interview. So Mary Kay learns a lot about not only what it means to be African American during this time period, but to be African American male and incarcerated in Benny's case. Lots and lots of layers here. If you are interested in this book, I do have copies to give away, so wait until the end of the podcast and you'll find out how to be entered into that giveaway to win a copy of Blackbird. In the meantime, let's go ahead and get to the interview with Jean so she can tell you more about this book. Hi, Jean. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our talking together.
I am as well, and we are here to talk about your debut novel. It's called Blackbird Blues. Before we get to the book, though, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about yourself, that would be appreciated.
Okay. I have had several careers. I am 71 years old. I was a newspaper reporter at the Milwaukee Journal in my 20s, which was an interesting thing because at the time there were very few women who covered anything but the women's page. And I was the first woman to cover City Hall there and the first woman to do quite a few things, including I was on the editorial board. So I had the opportunity to cover Roe v. Wade, which figures into this book, or at least the background figured into this book. I went on from there. I left the editorial board, partly because I wanted to do something that wasn't you didn't start over every day with your subject. And I went to the University of Chicago and got a PhD in human development. And I used that degree to and became a psychologist and saw patients in psychoanalytic psychotherapy for many years, 30 years in private practice. I also taught psychology at St. Xavier College for a while and ran a low-cost clinic for patients who couldn't afford their own treatment before I went into private practice for myself. But then I retired, and when I retired, I started writing fiction. And the fiction just kind of grew and grew. Initially, I was writing short stories, but I went to Bread Loaf, the Writers' Conference, and to Sewanee, the Writers' Conference. And at both places, my teachers there said, "What are you doing writing short stories? Things you're writing about are too complex to fit into a short story. You shouldn't be writing a novel." And of course, I didn't have the courage to try to write a novel, and somebody had encouraged me to do it. And on the way back I think it was from Sewanee, I started writing what later became the Blackbird Blues.
Thank you for that. So let's talk a bit about Blackbird Blues. Can you give a bit of the premise of the story?
The main characters are an 18-year-old Irish-American girl who and her mentor. Her mentor is dead in the first scene. She discovers her body. She's been killed in a car accident, and Mary Kay O'Donnell, the main character, discovers her. And the Sister Michaeline, who's her mentor, has written a diary that at her funeral, the man approached Mary Kay and gave her Sister Michaeline's diary. So the two main lines of the book are Mary Kay's development in tandem with Lucius, who is the man, and the diary. So the chapters alternate between what's going on with Mary Kay and Lucius in 1963 and the diary, which is going on in the 1940s.
It's time to take our first break, but see, I didn't even mention that there was also that. I mean, I mentioned the diary and Sister Michaeline's story. Obviously, that would be before 1963, but you also get that historical view of the 40s and Sister Michaeline's husband going to war. Lucius actually was in World War I. There's just a broad scope of different historical glimpses that you get in this book, which I really appreciated. So we are going to take that first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking a little bit more about Mary Kay and that relationship that friendship she develops with Lucius. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the backdoors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with Jean K. Carney about her debut novel, Blackbird Blues. Before the break, she was talking about Mary Kay and Lucius and the relationship that they develop. So let's go ahead and get back to that interview.
And Mary Kay and Lucius have an interesting relationship in that, they have the generational difference. They have they're different racially, which might seem somewhat odd at any time, but this is 1963. Can you talk a little bit about writing a historically accurate relationship between the two of them in a time that was very fraught with tension as the civil rights movement was getting going?
Well, this is the civil rights movement, and of course the civil rights movement is one of the main characters in the book. Lucius is an unusual man. His parents came up in the Great Migration from the South, and a very open-minded man, and he was in a jazz man. So he and Sister Michaeline had been in a jazz band with Sister Michaeline's husband at the time, and so he was very much involved in the jazz scene in Chicago in the 30s was very interracial. So it's not historically, it's not surprising that he and Mary Kay O'Donnell would become friends, even in 1963, because that whole scene was integrated even in the 20s and the 30s. There were the whole jazz scene was an integrated aspect of the Chicago community. It's quite an interesting thing. And I did one of the fun things about writing this book. I knew a lot about the civil rights movement because I lived through it. As I said, I'm 71 years old, and so I, marched and did the things that we did to try to be part of that. But also, I really had a wonderful time reading about, for example, the Carl Sandburg's Chicago Race Riot book. because when Lucius comes back from he was in World War One, because he's lots older than Mary Kay, but when he comes back from World War One, in World War One, African Americans couldn't serve. What they served, they served in World War One, but they could not serve with white Americans in our military. What they did was they served under French command. So when they came back, the Chicago race riots were right after they came back from World War One, and that was part of what made those race riots so incendiary. And it's memorialized in Carl Sandburg's absolutely magnificent book called The Chicago Race Riots. And there were race riots all over the country that year in 1919, because here are these guys who went to war, and then when they came back, they couldn't be on the same beach with white people. It was just too much, and really very, very poignant. So that comes out in the book, and that kind of research was just very, not only interesting, but very moving for me to do. So I did a lot of research on that sort of thing. I also did a lot of research on the subject of abortion. The story of Jane, the legendary underground feminist abortion service, that also took place in Chicago, and that's a book. It's a book by Laura Kaplan, and that is a book everybody should read, because before Roe v. Wade was passed, I think a lot of young people, when I was writing the book, I discovered that a lot of young people don't know that abortion ever was illegal. They don't know how many women died of illegal abortions, and what a big shift it was when Roe v. Wade was passed. But before Roe v. Wade was passed, there were underground services that women organized for themselves. And again, these are very moving, very moving. It's a very moving history of how abortion was taken care of before it was legal. And of course, when right now abortion is being, in many states, abortion rights are being cut back, and there's even some talk that it could be, Roe v. Wade could be repealed again. So I think that my book is timely, although when I began to write it, there was no such talk of that, because it took me 9 years to write the book, including revisions. Anyone who has written a book, a novel, even a novel, knows that there are many revisions that go into a book, especially one that's complicated, that covers the history, that spans as much history as this book does, because this book covers the 40s and then all the way through the 60s, with the main part of it being in 1963.
Yeah, it's a really interesting period in history, and you've got not only you've got the difference in race and age, but then you throw in the abortion issue, but also the fact that Mary Kay is Catholic, and so you've got the religious aspects of her story. What about Mary Kay do you think will resonate with readers?
Oh, I think that many, many readers will identify with the fact that here she is, on the cusp of adulthood, having finished high school, ready to figure out what she wants to do with her life. And she has some ideas, and initially she thought maybe she would go to the convent herself. And then she decided, no, she wants to be a jazz singer. The reason that she was so involved with Sister Michaeline is that Sister Michaeline was a jazz singer in her youth and was teaching her jazz. And she decided she wanted to be a jazz singer, and but her parents weren't. They weren't in favor of just about anything that she wanted to do. They weren't in favor of.
Right.
It wasn't their idea. It wasn't what she should be doing. And
well, yeah, and she's the oldest of 7 children, so there's that aspect of, her life and her relationship with her parents.
And she doesn't want to just do her mother's life all over again by just simply raising children. She thinks there might be more to life than just raising children. Not that she doesn't want to have a child ever, but that she wants to do more than that.
Time to take our second break of the podcast. When we come back, more about what Jean was just speaking of in terms of the choices or maybe lack thereof that Mary Kay felt that she had as a young woman in 1963. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking with Jean Carney about Blackbird Blues. Let's go ahead and get back to that interview, actually the conclusion of this interview.
And it's an interesting look because it's not that far past, a little over 50 years, but her choices are, it keeps coming up in conversations, her choices are she can be a wife, a teacher, a stewardess, there's very limited options for her as a female in this time. And I don't think maybe a lot of younger readers might realize how recent that is in our past.
Yes, I think that's right. And in fact, when I graduated from college in 1970, it was pretty much that. And it was very unusual because when I went to the Milwaukee Journal, I got that job because I went out and got a scoop that no one else in the city had and took it in there into the editor. And he liked the story so much that he hired me. But where did they put me? They put me on editing the TV listings. That was my first job.
Oh, goodness.
But it didn't take long, and I got called in. It wasn't long. It was a matter of months when I got called in, and I was asked, well, did I want to go to the women's page, or would I maybe like to have a crack at hard news? And I got a crack at hard news because I said I jumped at it. I would like to do hard news. And then I sat in a foursome with 3 investigative male reporters, all in their 40s, and those men vied to see who could teach me more about investigative reporting. They each took me under their wing. They taught me everything they knew. There was none of this like Me Too stuff or anything. No one ever made a pass at me. It was an absolutely fantastic experience, and I went from there up, and pretty soon I was first woman ever to have City Hall as my own beat. And I was on the editorial board when I left the paper, which was really quite something in 1970, whatever it was, 5, 6.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it's really wonderful that you had that group of mentors who really were mentors and not just like having you get coffee or doing some of those stereotypical things that could have been expected.
The men at the Milwaukee Journal in the 1970s were extremely supportive of women and extremely helpful and attempting to help us get launched. And they did that for me and for any number of other women who then came aboard. It was it's a wonderful story.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Are there any? I imagine the answer is yes, but are there autobiographical elements within the book?
Well, the story is completely fiction. I mean, like, I never had an abortion. What else? But there are things like, for example, we did have a family dog named Bernie. The house that the O'Donnells live in is a house that my family lived in. But these are like minor things. It's easier if you're writing a novel, if you have to make up a whole new house, then every time you think of, well, then what direction does she turn to go to the bathroom and where is the bedroom? It interferes with, writing the book. So I just made the house, and the stables in the back. We did have stables in the back at that house. And there were horses, and my dad did fall off the horse and things like that. But the plot of the novel is entirely fiction. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It makes perfect sense. I mean, I actually like the simplicity of how you said that. Then that way you don't even have to really think about what direction she would turn if she was going to the kitchen or the bathroom.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that's wonderful. How do you think the relationships that Mary Kay has in the book with Lucius and Sister Michaeline, but more Sister Michaeline actually after her death, how do both of those relationships influence her in her journey or in this story?
I want the readers to see that unfold, because I think there's some surprises in there. I mean, I don't think. Let me put it this way: I didn't see it coming. What I did, when you asked about what's the inspiration for the story, what happened was I was sitting in the Jazz Showcase here in Chicago, and I saw a young man making music with drums and a xylophone and back and forth and moving very, very quickly. And it took me back to a moment, not just a moment, but a time in my life when I was at the Milwaukee Journal, when I was covering children's court, and there was a boy who would sit in the children's home because and make music by moving his hands over the grit on the floor and the grit on the table. And he was in there because he had, at the end of the school day, he had walked up and picked up his teacher and turned her over and smashed her head in the wastebasket and snapped her neck and killed her. There was nobody who came to his hearing at children's court except for the public defender and me, and no one who ever came to see him in the children's court to visit him, ever. So I made it my business to come. I was a reporter for children's court at the time. It was my first beat at the paper. So I came and I would talk to him and whatnot. And over time, I came to the conclusion that he actually did not know why he did it. I don't think he ever knew why he did it. He just did it. So that really stuck with me. And here we are now, fast forward 33 years later. I'm sitting with my husband in the Jazz Showcase, and this guy is doing the same kind of movements. And I got the idea of making a character. Now, my character Benny in the novel Blackbird Blues doesn't kill a teacher, but the feeling that I have toward my character Benny is very similar to the feeling that developed for this kid in the children's home, meaning that
Mhm.
it's kind of love for a person who is doing things that they don't know why they're doing them, that are bad
Mhm.
for them and bad for other people, and they don't know why they're doing them. And that feeling grew, and that character grew. And then pretty soon other characters started to kind of emerge. So I didn't start out with a story. I started out first with one character, then another character, then another character. And these characters, I would go out on walks, and these characters came erupting up from inside me somewhere. And they started doing things, and the characters started doing things. And some of them were doing things that I didn't approve of, and I didn't want them to be doing these things. But I was writing them down and whatever, and eventually it emerged into the book.
Yeah, that so many authors say similar things, that the characters just suddenly start acting in a way that is not expected. So I find that fascinating.
Yes, and
Um,
it's not like you sit down and you say, well, I'm going to write a story about this and this and this and this and this, and they're going to do this and this. And they have their own minds of their own, and they do what they do, and you can't get in their way. They don't allow it.
Right, that's fascinating. You said it took 9 years for this book. Are you working on another book, or do you want to write another novel?
I am working on something, and I'll tell you about it. But the reason it took so long is that I was a full-time psychoanalytic psychologist, so I wasn't working full-time on it. I had whittled myself down to a 4-day a week, and then eventually to a 3-day a week. And, so, and then I had, and the revisions. And I had a wonderful editor, Joey McGarvey, who's just a splendid editor and helped me tremendously with this book. I want to tell everybody that, because if she's available, she's sensational. In terms of what I'm working on now, is completely different. It's nonfiction, and it's going to be a story of about my work with a boy whose parents were told when he was 5 years old that he had a learning disability that was so severe that he would never go to high school. And we worked together, myself and this boy, for many, many, many years. And he now has 3 degrees from Harvard and a thriving business, and which involves helping kids get into colleges and figure out what they want to do with their lives. But I invented a system that helped him deal with these disabilities that is an original approach, and I think that I would like to share that, because I think a lot of other people would profit from it.
That's amazing. Wow, thank you for that. Do you have, from your own experience, because you've been writing for a long time, you were a journalist, and then I'm sure you wrote in your
career as a psychologist.
So do you have advice for aspiring authors who may want to write a novel or even nonfiction, as your second book is?
Yeah, I do, actually. Write what you know. Write what you know, and write what you're afraid to write. Write what you're worried that people will be all upset about, and just keep writing it. And revise and revise and revise and revise.
Thank you. And then when you take the time to read for yourself, what are your favorite authors or genres?
Oh, I really do have. I mean, in terms of the classics, I love Tolstoy. I love Anna Karenina. I go back to that all the time. I also love War and Peace, but my favorite is Anna Karenina. I love Lolita, Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita. I love Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. I love 1984, and everybody should be rereading that now in this climate. I also love Elizabeth Strout, Anything is Possible. My Name is Lucy Barton. I love Paulette Child's News of the World. It's a fabulous book. You don't hear a lot about it, but it's a slim little volume. It's super. And I love Anthony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See. I read all the time, although I have to say that when I was writing Blackbird Blues, I wasn't reading anything like what I normally read. There's another author I want to mention, Pat Barker. She has a series of books, The Ghost Road, The Eye in the Door, Regeneration. She's out of this world. They're slim little books, but they're super.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate it. I know you have a website, so if you can tell people where to find your website and if you're on any kinds of social media.
Well, my website is Jean K. Carney, JeanKcarney.com. My husband has links on the website to all my events and the reviews and things that are coming up and blogs and all of that.
Okay. Well, Jean, we've talked about a number of different things today, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to bring up about Blackbird Blues or writing in general?
Somebody who really helped me, I think I should talk about, and that's Ken Warren is a professor at the University of Chicago. He's a professor of African American studies. And one of the things that I was concerned about is that I have the characters of Lucius and Benny are African American men. And so I went to him for help in making sure that the dialogue of my African American characters and their behavior and just everything about them and how they were portrayed in the novel would be appropriate and believable, and that he would think that they would be, the way that they should be, and if he thought I should change anything about it. So he gave me a couple of books that were letters written between African American people, men, because these are my black characters are all men, that they had written between them to show the kind of languages that he used. And these men are from the same generation and the same part of the country as my characters. So I went through and I read the books, of course, and then that helped me a lot in designing their dialogue. And then Ken helped me just all the way around. And so I was confident, before I published the book, that he had me in the right ballpark with my African American characters. And I'm going to do an event with Ken in Chicago at the Seminary Co-op bookstore, in which he's going to be my interlocutor. I'm really happy about that because he's been very, very helpful with the book, but especially with the book entirely, but especially with the whole aspect of the African American characters in the book. And I'm very grateful to him about that. And I'm lucky that he was willing to be involved and to be so helpful to me. And I'm wondering...
Sure, that's a real gift.
It is a gift. And he's a lovely man anyway, and he really knows his stuff. This is what he does, African American literature. And of course he's African American, being his academic subject.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you also for taking the time to talk to me about your debut novel. It's called Blackbird Blues, and I so appreciate you talking to me about it.
Well, I appreciate your inviting me, and I must say that I enjoyed talking with you. I'm glad that you're interested in Blackbird Blues, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak about it.
I really enjoyed speaking with Jean. I want to say thank you once again to her. I was semi-joking, but not really. After we finished with the recording part of the interview, we were chatting and I said I could do a podcast just on her life because there were so many questions that I wanted to ask her about, being that first female reporter in that room with all the men working, doing the reporting on the children's court and then moving into a career in psychology and everything that she learned and studied and developed during that time. I mean, and plus she was a member, she was a part of the civil rights movement. She witnessed a part of history that I only get to read about, etc. So I find these conversations fascinating, and actually I am looking forward to her nonfiction book because I would like to learn more about what she was talking about in terms of that young man that she worked with and how he's doing today and what the technique was that they worked on and with. So thank you to Jean for taking the time to come on the podcast. Thank you, as always, to you, my listeners. I very much appreciate you. It is Thanksgiving week, and I am thankful for you. It is Thanksgiving week, so let's see. Let's go ahead and, the standard thing, if you would like to be entered to win a copy of Blackbird Blues, just go to our social media, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, GSMC Book Review, and comment on the post with this episode. Episode 199, interview with Jean K. Carney. And, tell me your favorite Thanksgiving food. That's what you're going to do to win this book. I know it doesn't have anything to do with the book, but it's timely in terms of the holidays. I have Thanksgiving on the brain, okay? Cut me some slack. So yes, comment on this post with your favorite Thanksgiving food and you will be entered to win a copy of Blackbird Blues. Speaking of social media, we would love it if you would follow us, like us, share, retweet, do all of those fabulous social media things. Comment. I would love to hear your comments and what you think of some of the books and the authors that I speak to here on the podcast. If you like this podcast, we would really love it if you could subscribe and give us a 5-star review. Thanksgiving is coming and that would make me really, really thankful. More thankful than pie even. And that's pretty thankful. Speaking of thankful, thank you again to Jean. Thank you again to you, my listeners. I hope you're having a wonderful week. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Thanksgiving. And I hope that Thanksgiving gives you plenty of time to get lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.